Hello YouTubers, hope you're having a good day, and hello to my brothers and sisters in Christ out there in YouTube land. May the Lord be blessing you according to His will, for everything we do should be according to His will and not our own selfish ways, which is the actual foundation of sin. Anyway, the title of this one is going to be, actually it's a continuation from the four schools of interpretation regarding revelation in God's Word, and this one's going to be called To Whom Was Revelation Written? In other words, for whom was it written? Who was it to be revealed to? So I'm sharing it again from this superb book called Unlocking the Bible by David Pawson, and I had a response from fellow YouTuber and saying how he would prefer to read the book himself. So anybody out there, if they want to private message me, I will send them the ISBN number so they can obtain a copy for themselves. Highly recommended. I'm finding it really edifying and really clarifying things and actually affirming things that I believe the Spirit has shown me when studying God's Word. Anyway, so without further ado, so sense of purpose. Why was the book of Revelation written? The answer is really accessible by asking another question: for whom was it written? It was never intended to be a university textbook for theological staff or students. It is often they who have made it appear so complex that simple folk have been intimidated. Let one of them confess this. We boldly affirm the study of this book would present absolutely no possibility of error if the inconceivable, often ridiculous, prejudice of theologians in all ages had not so trampled it and made it bristle with difficulties that most readers shrink from it in alarm. Apart from those preconceptions, the Revelation would be the most simple, most transparent book that prophet ever penned, as quoted by Roost in 1884 and quoted in the Prophecy Handbook by the World Bible Publishers in 1991. The situation has hardly improved since then, as a recent comment reveals. It is one of the misfortunes of our expertise-oriented culture that when anything seems difficult, it is sent off to the university to be figured out, as quoted by Eugene Peterson, writing on Revelation in Reverse Thunder, published by HarperCollins in 1988. This has led to a widespread notion that this book will not be understood by the laymen, whether that label is used in its ecclesiastical or educational sense. It was written for ordinary readers. It cannot be too strongly emphasized that Revelation was written for everyday, ordinary people. It was addressed to the members of 7 churches at a time when not many were wise by human standards, not many were influential, not many were of noble birth, as quoting 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. It was said of Jesus that the common people heard him gladly, quoting Mark chapter 12, verse 37 from the Authorized Version. This was a tribute to them as well as to him. They recognized that he spoke with authority, that he knew what he was talking about. It is much easier to fool the highly educated. The book of Revelation yields its treasures to those who read it with a simple faith, an open mind, and a tender heart. A story is circulated in America which highlights the point, though it sounds like an apocryphal preacher's tale, as the pastor's little boy said, "Daddy, was that story true, or was you just preaching?" Apparently some theological students were tired and confused by lectures on apocalyptic, so decided to have a game of basketball in the campus gymnasium. While playing, they noticed the black janitor reading his Bible while waiting to lock up. He asked which part he was studying, and was surprised to find he was going through Revelation. "You don't understand that, do you?" "Sure do." "What's it about then?" With eyes lit up and a broad smile came the reply, "Simple. Jesus wins." Of course, there's more to be said than that, but it's not a bad summary of the message. Plenty have studied the contents and missed the message. Common sense is a basic requirement. No one takes the whole book literally. No one takes it all symbolically. But where is the line to be drawn between the literal and the symbolical? This will have a profound effect on the interpretation. Common sense will be a great help. The 4 horsemen are symbols, but the wars, bloodshed, famine, and disease, they represent clearly literal. The lake of fire is a symbol of hell, but the unending torment in it is literal. Quoting Revelation chapter 20, verse 10. The rules of common speech may be usefully employed. Words should be taken in their plainest, simplest sense, unless clearly indicated otherwise. It should be assumed that speakers, including Jesus, and writers, including John, mean what they say. Their communication should be taken at face value. Another such rule is that the same word in the same context is presumed to have the same meaning, again, unless clearly indicated otherwise. To change the meaning of a word suddenly and without warning would be as confusing as changing the pronunciation or spelling. This rule directly affects the two resurrections in Revelation chapter 20. Having said all this, we must add the necessary qualification that Revelation was written for ordinary folk in a very different time and place from ours. It is not surprising if some things obvious to them are obscure to us 2,000 years later, and a similar number of miles away. They were Gentiles of mixed race who lived in a Roman province, spoke Greek, read Jewish scriptures, and were held together by a shared Christian faith. So we need to use as much knowledge of their background, culture, and language as we can. The object of the exercise is to discover what they would have understood when they heard Revelation read aloud to them, perhaps at one sitting. That could be quite different from what we perceive as we read it silently, a short portion each day. But the book is clearly for us in our day as well, or it would not be in the New Testament. The Lord must have intended this when he gave it to John, so we can assume that our distance in time and space is not an inseparable handicap. A much more important factor than the cultural gap is the difference of circumstances. It is vital to ask what situation required the writing of this book. This is the master key required to unlock the whole volume. Behind every other book in the New Testament there is a reason for it being written, a need which it is designed to meet. Revelation is no exception. The practical reasons. We have already said that its primary purpose was not to reveal a schedule of future events, but to prepare people for what would happen. So what is coming for which without this book they would not be ready? The answer comes on the first page, chapters 1, verses 9 to 10. John, the writer, is already suffering for his faith. He is in prison, but not for any crime. He is a political prisoner on the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. The modern equivalent would be Alcatraz or Robben Island. He has been arrested and exiled for religious reasons. His exclusive devotion to the Word of God and the testimony of Jesus is seen as treason by the authorities, a threat to the Pax Romana based on polytheistic tolerance and an imperial cult. Citizens were expected to believe in many gods, and the emperor was one of them. Towards the end of the first century, this situation came to a head, creating a crisis of conscience for Christians. Julius Caesar had been the first to proclaim himself divine. His successor Augustus had encouraged the building of temples in his honor. A number of these had been erected in Asia, now western Turkey. While Nero had begun the persecution of Christians, daubing them with pitch and burning them alive as torches for his nightly garden parties, or sewing them in the skins of wild animals to be hunted by dogs, this was limited in duration and location. It was the advent of Domitian in the last decade of the first century that inaugurated the fiercest attacks on Christians, which would continue intermittently for 200 years. He demanded universal worship of himself on pain of death. Once a year, incense had to be thrown on an altar of fire before his bust with an exclamation, "Caesar is Lord." The appointed day on which this had to be done was designated the Lord's Day. This was the very day on which Revelation began to be written. Modern readers may be forgiven for thinking it was Sunday. Actually, it could have been, but Sunday was called the first day of the week in the early church. Two elements in the Greek text indicate the annual imperial festival. One is the definite article, or on the Lord's Day, or not a Lord's Day. The other is the fact that Lord is in the form of an adjective, not a noun. The Lordy, or Lordly Day, the very name given to it by Domitian, who also claimed the title Lord and our God. Tough times lie ahead for those who refuse to say anything but Jesus is Lord. It would be a matter of life and death. Excuse me. The word witness in Greek, martyr, would take on a new deadly meaning. The church was facing its fiercest test so far. How many would remain loyal under such pressure? After all, John was the only one of the 12 apostles left. All the others had already suffered a martyr's death. Christian tradition records that Andrew died on an X-shaped cross in Patras of Achaia. Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel, was flayed alive in Armenia. James, brother of John, was beheaded by Herod Agrippa in Jerusalem. James, son of Cleopas and Mary, was stoned. Jude, or Thaddeus, was shot with arrows in Armenia. Matthew was slain by the sword in Parthia. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. Philip was hanged on a pillar in Hierapolis in Phrygia. Simon Zealot was crucified in Persia. Thomas was slain with a spear in India. Matthias was stoned and beheaded. Paul also had been beheaded in Rome. So the writer of Revelation was only too aware of the cost of loyalty to Jesus. He did not even know that he would be the only apostle to die a natural death. Revelation is a manual for martyrdom. It calls believers to be faithful, even to the point of death. Chapter 10, verse 10. Martyrs figure largely in its pages. Believers are encouraged to stick it out. One frequent exhortation is to endure, a passive attitude. Right in the middle of the biggest troubles comes the plea, this course of patience, endurance of the part of the saints who obey God's commandments and remain faithful to Jesus. This may be said to be the key verse in the whole book, but there is also a call to an active attitude in suffering for Jesus to overcome. This verb is used even more frequently than endure, and may be said to be the key word in the whole book. Each letter to the 7 churches concludes with a call to each member to be an overcomer, that is, to overcome all temptations and pressures, both inside and outside the church. To lapse from truly Christian belief and behaviour is to be unfaithful to Jesus. The message is not just that Christ wins, but that Christians must also win through. They are to follow the Lord who said, "Take heart, I have overcome the world," quoting John chapter 16, verse 33, who now says in Revelation, "You also must overcome the world." Of course, that is why this book becomes so much more meaningful to Christians under persecution. Maybe this is also why Western Christians in comfortable churches fail to find it relevant. It has to be read through tears. The book offers 2 incentives to encourage the persecuted to overcome. One is positive, reward. Many prizes are offered to those who persevere. The right to eat of the tree of the life in the paradise of God, never to be hurt by the second death. To eat the hidden manna and be given a white stone with a secret new name on it. To have authority to rule the nations. To sit with Jesus on his throne. To be dressed in white and made a pillar in the temple of God, bearing his name and never to leave it. Above all, and beyond all the suffering, the overcoming believer is promised a place in the new heaven and earth, enjoying God's presence forever and ever. The prospect is glorious. But there is a negative motivation as well, punishment. What is the fate of believers who are unfaithful under pressure? In a word, they will have none of the above blessings. Worse than that, they will share the fate of unbelievers in the lake of fire. 2 verses alone, taken from first and last sections, confirm this awful possibility. He who overcomes, I will never erase his name from the book of life. Chapter 3, verse 5. If language means anything at all, it means that those who do not overcome are in danger of having their names erased, literally scraped off the parchment with a knife. The book of life appears in 4 books in the Bible: Exodus 32, verse 32, Psalm 69, verse 28, Philippians 4, verse 3, Revelation 3, verse 5. 3 of these contexts mention names of the people of God being blotted out after they have sinned against the Lord. To read a verse of Revelation as if it could include he who doesn't overcome in the promise as well is to make the reward meaningless. He who overcomes will inherit all this, the new heaven and earth with the new Jerusalem. And I will be his God, and he will be my son. But the cowardly, the faithless, the immoral, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulphur. This is the second death. Chapter 21, 7-8 of Revelation. It needs to be remembered that the whole of Revelation is directed to believers, not unbelievers. Throughout is addressed to the saints and his servants. The reference here is to cowardly and faithless believers. This is confined by the word but, directly in contrast to those deserving of the faith with the believers who overcome. In other words, Revelation sets 2 destinies before Christians. They will either be raised with Christ and share his reign, ending up in the new universe, or they will lose their inheritance in the kingdom and end up in hell. This alternative is confirmed elsewhere in the New Testament. The Gospel of Matthew is a manual for discipleship containing 5 major discourses addressed to sons of the kingdom. Yet most of Jesus' teaching on hell is to be found here, and all but 2 of his warnings are addressed to his disciples. The Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5-7, which blesses those who are persecuted because of Jesus, goes on to speak of hell, and concludes with a reminder that there are 2 destinies. The missionary commissioning in chapter 10 includes a charge, do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Verse 28. And whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven. Verse 33. The Olivet Discourse in chapters 24-25 condemns slothful and careless servants of the Master to being assigned a place with the hypocrites. 24 verse 51. And thrown outside into darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. 25:30. Paul takes the same line when reminding Timothy of a trustworthy saying, if we die with him, we will also live with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. If we disown him, he will disown us. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 to 12. Many Christians deny the implication of all this. Certainly there is more to be said. The author has dealt more fully with this vital question of volume entitled Once Saved, Always Saved, which was published by Hodgman Stouter in 1996. Meanwhile, the position in Revelation seems very clear. It is even possible for believers to lose their share in the tree of life and in the holy city, simply by tampering with the text of the book, chapter 22, verse 19, thus changing its message. We could summarize the aim of Revelation by saying it was written to exhort Christians facing immense pressures to endure and overcome, and thus avoid the second death by keeping their names in the book of life. We should find that every chapter and verse fits easily into this overall purpose as we look at the shape and structure of the whole book. Well, I will give those to you pending responses from the viewers. In fact, it amazes me how YouTubers will view these vlogs and leave no rating, no comments. Do they just dismiss them? I suppose obviously all kinds of people will be watching these, and I guess if they're not believers in a loving creator God who actually created us for his purpose and not our own, they will dismiss it. But surely there must be some believers out there, and I would appreciate some feedback. But anyway, if I get some feedback on this like I have in the last one, I will continue with this discourse. So, may our Heavenly Father, Yahweh, bless all of you according to his will, and it's from me, bye for now.